Okay, Joe, welcome to the show. You are the Libertarian Party nominee for President of the United States. Congratulations.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, give us a little bit about what your platform is, so people can get a feel for who you are.
So, my three things are healthcare, bringing the troops home, and the environment. And I think these are all important issues, and they're issues that the Americans care about. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with healthcare.
Yeah.
Right now, the biggest myth I want to overcome is the one perpetrated by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and then all of these media people out there, which is that since the current free market system doesn't work, we need single payer. And I'd like to point out that we do not have a free market system, and that we haven't had one since at least World War II. And if we did have a free market system, it would work so much better than what we have now. And to just give you, and I've got all sorts of arguments for this, but I would just like to give you one quick fact, which is that if you look at the two free market, the two fields that are more free market than others, and that would be LASIK and cosmetic surgery, because people pay for it with their own money, not the insurance companies, prices have gone down steadily and quality has gone way up because they have to compete with each other. And I wish the entire healthcare system were like that, in which knee surgeons and heart surgeons, in which they all had to compete for their business, just like car dealerships and computer manufacturers do.
Yeah, I would say that the healthcare system hasn't been free market since 1900, when the Rockefellers pretty much hijacked the entire thing. I did some research after I did an interview last year with Howard Strauss, who was Max Gerson's grandson. I've been cutting a video together of that interview, and it just led me down rabbit holes like mad with the amount of information that was coming out of it. Now, the Rockefeller Foundation basically destroyed healthcare in America.
Yeah, and that's why you should say at least World War II, because, I mean, if you go back further, of course, there's licensing and all that. What I think dramatically changed healthcare was that around World War II, they had the wage and price freeze control.
Right.
And this is just one more example of government trying to fix a problem and causing 10 new problems. So companies wanted to, of course, hire the best people, and they weren't allowed to give give raises. They weren't allowed to offer higher salaries for better employees. So they got around that by offering health insurance, by offering benefits. And because of that, we are now the only industrialized nation in the world who has health insurance tied to employment. And it's because of that World War II wage and price freeze. So, but you're right. We could go back probably 100 years from now. We could probably go back to the 1700s and find problems. Right. But I just think that was a huge turning point, because what we have now is we have a lot of people who are working for somebody who can't or doesn't offer health insurance. And what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to compete against the big corporations?
Yeah, I've worked plenty of jobs where that wasn't an option. And you know what? I didn't worry about it. But also, this whole thing with like Obamacare, where people were forced into getting health insurance, and if they didn't, then they got a penalty on their taxes. Mm-hmm. And I know people who were getting put into they were losing their property because of what that entire socialized healthcare system did. What would be your idea? What would you want to see put in instead?
I think that Singapore offers a great example, which is the same way that the state of Indiana did it, in which people are in charge of their own healthcare dollars. Now, I don't want to get into the exact nuts and bolts, but they do it through a health savings account. But I would just like to point out that when people spend their own money, they shop for prices. And what's really interesting is that in the state of Indiana, when they first started the program, only about 10% of the people used generic medication, which is one way to cut down on costs, by the way. Right. After only a year or two, 90% of the people were using generic drugs, and they were happy to do so because they got to keep the savings. And that's the way it should be. Whenever you buy a car or buy gas for your car or buy groceries, if you shop around for the lowest price, you get to keep the money that you save. Right. And that's not what we have right now. People just go out, a lot of times you can't even get a price ahead of time. But what does it matter to you? You just charge it to the insurance company and they pay for it. And so if you look at Singapore, who has true competition, look at their prices compared to ours. A heart bypass in the US costs about $130,000. In Singapore, it only costs $18,000. So we're talking about insurance companies here who are denying claims because they cost too much. Well, heck, in Singapore, a lot of people here buy a car for $18,000. Granted, they have to make payments, but it's not out of reach for a lot of Americans.
Right. Yeah, I know people who, just based on their age, were denied certain healthcare procedures, and because of that, they can't even walk anymore.
It's tragic. And, here's where I think Sarah Palin got a bad rap. She talked about the death panels.
Right.
Well, we saw that in action with the coronavirus. Over in Italy, if you are over 80 years of age, because they have single payer, they've got kind of a, socialist blend. They're all a little different, but we're basically talking socialism. And what happened there is anybody over the age of 80 was basically just given a bed and said, sorry, we don't have enough hospital beds. We don't have enough ventilators. So that essentially was a death panel saying we can't treat you.
Well, they did kind of almost the same thing here in a way when they started shuffling off people who are diagnosed with coronavirus into nursing homes.
Yes, New York City. Uh-huh. Yes, everybody was praising the mayor for what a good job he was doing, and then it looks like he increased the spread. That is tragic. And once again, I tell people that I'm running for president because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, and they usually hurt the people they try to help. There's a perfect example. We leave it in charge of the bureaucrats, and we get disaster.
Yeah, and they're always so helpful when you get them on the phone, too.
Yes, we're here to serve. Exactly. Uh-huh.
It's like watching some of the earlier South Park episodes with the police officer, and instead of to protect and serve on the side of his car, it said to patronize and annoy.
Oh, yes. Officer Bob, is that who you're talking about?
Bar Brady.
Yes.
Officer Bar Brady.
Yeah, I think South Park is great, and especially since one of the creators is a libertarian.
Yeah, they have a pretty decent philosophy when people start going after them for some of their episodes, and they say, hey, look, we make fun of everything, and we leave nothing behind, because the second you say that's off limits, that's when you run into problems.
Exactly.
Now, as far as the other, because this is something that Donald Trump said he was going to do, and for 3 years hasn't done it yet, which is, and you brought it up, which is bring the troops home.
Yes.
Why are we still in the Middle East fighting these little proxy wars and over something that happened 18 years ago, and we still never went to the right place?
That's what I'd like to ask Donald Trump in a debate on the debate stage, and I hope I can. What's ironic here is that the purpose of the military is to keep us safe. And what the military has been doing is making us less safe. And, let me quickly add, of course, there was absolutely no justification for bin Laden to gather up the people and make an attack and fly airplanes into buildings. However, because we were over there, he could justify it to his followers. And he kept pointing out, look, The Americans said they were going to be here temporarily, and they're not. They said they were going to be out by this date, and they're still here. And he would use it to rile them up against us. If we hadn't been over there, it would have been a lot harder for him to justify that to his followers. And in addition to making us less safe, just look at the money. Why are we in Europe? Let France and Germany, let them defend themselves. So we've got poor people here paying taxes that are going to support other countries' military. That's obscene.
Yeah, I think Ron Paul, when he was running for president in 2008 and 2012, he summed it up pretty good. He said the reason that they're attacking us over here is because we're over there.
Oh, that's an excellent way to put it. I'm a huge Ron Paul fan. That's an excellent way to put it. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah, and all the meddling that we do in these other countries. Now, I'm being ex-military myself, I have no issue with having a defensive army, a defensive navy, or any of that, but we don't need to be over there bombing these other countries, especially if you look at the official narrative of 9/11. It was 19 hijackers, most of them were from Saudi Arabia, so what's our option? Naturally, we have to go and invade Iraq.
Of course, of course. Yeah, and I'd like to respond to a couple of your points. First of all, you mentioned Ron Paul. A lot of people don't realize that, I believe it was in the 2012 election when he was running for the Republican nomination, more soldiers overseas, because they could look at the absentee ballots. They were, absentee as opposed to voting in the polls. More soldiers supported Ron Paul than any other candidate. And also, if you look at the contributions from the soldiers, more of it went to Ron Paul than all the other candidates combined. And people were shocked, like, that doesn't make any sense. But you have to separate the many fine soldiers. And by the way, thank you so much for your service. I really appreciate it. My dad was in the military as well. He was in the Navy. So we have people who sign up on good faith to defend our country, and it's not their fault they're sent over to where we don't want to be. And you mentioned Trump. Well, Trump said he was going to get us out. He hasn't. What he's done is he's kind of moved some people around, or he moves people out of an area and puts in drones. That's still a presence, and it's still causing problems.
Yeah, not to mention, again, the amount of money that's being spent, to keep this financed.
Oh, yeah. If you look at it, our budget is 3 times the budget of the next larger, of the next size. We could cut, and that's what I would do. I would cut 2/3 of the military budget, bring the troops home. We would still be tied for the largest military on this earth. And what my campaign slogan is, turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. I want to defend our borders. I want the best military out there to defend our country. There's no reason we need to be out in the rest of the world.
Yes, and people, I don't think they know that much about Switzerland, but during World War II, they were one of the few countries that was never invaded by Germany.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I like to point to Switzerland is sometimes when you tell people who aren't familiar, with foreign affairs, you tell them that you want to bring the troops home, and their immediate reaction sometimes is, oh, well, I don't want to be an isolationist. So I like to point out Switzerland because everybody knows they trade with other countries. They allow tourists in. It's not like they're isolated from the rest of the country. In fact, I want goods to cross the borders, because when goods cross the borders, soldiers don't have to. And that's what we need to do to keep the peace.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that the Democrats and the Republican Party both hijacked this narrative from Ron Paul's campaign when he talked about bringing the troops home, and stop running an empire. They pegged him as an isolationist. They backed him into a corner. You couldn't get away from that. Everybody that I tried to talk to who didn't know Ron Paul all that well, that's all they could talk about was what an isolationist he was.
Yep, and that's exactly why I say we need to turn America into one giant Switzerland, because people know that, hey, Switzerland, they're nice people.
Right.
They talk to us, they talk to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, and it was all about doing free trade. That was his other big thing, was free trade, which is one of the other libertarian principles I like, is the free markets.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to tell you a little story here. In the early 80s, I was driving a Fiat Spider, and I parked in a parking lot, and I saw this older gentleman coming towards me with a real scowl on his face. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't cut him off. I didn't mean to do anything. And he comes over, explains that he's a veteran of World War II, and asks me how dare I drive an Italian car. Now, because he served our country, of course, I don't want to get into an argument with him, but what I wanted to say was, look, if we're buying cars from Italy, they're not going to bomb us. You tend to not kill your best customers. Why don't we have to worry about Japan and another Pearl Harbor attack? It's because we buy so many Toyotas and Hondas. So as long as we have free trade, and since you brought this up about free trade, I mean, we need free trade, not fair trade, because my question to that is, fair according to whose standards? If you have two people who can freely choose to trade on whatever product or service they want at whatever price they think is fair, then why does the government need to get involved?
Yeah, they definitely got their fingers in every little aspect of our lives, which is one of the things that bothers me most. And it's funny because when you were talking about how Italy's not going to bomb us because we're good customers of theirs, there was a thing a few years ago where Al Qaeda or ISIS or whatever brand name they decided to go by at that time, they were talking about poisoning the cocaine supply coming from south of the border.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, yeah, that's a really good plan. We can kill a bunch of Americans this way. The drug cartels stepped in and said, you're not going to do that. Otherwise, we're coming over there. And ISIS backed off. So we were actually saved a little bit by the drug cartels because they didn't want to lose their customer base.
So even the drug cartels are looking out for us. Yeah, in fact, my husband and I were walking in a neighborhood that's not known to be the best neighborhood, and this guy comes running across a yard, and hey, how you doing, whatever. And so after we kept walking, we said, and I just turned to the guy and I said, no, we're good, thanks, and we kept going. And my husband asked me, what was that all about? And I said, well, this kind of neighborhood, I wouldn't be surprised if he was just giving us good customer service because he's a drug dealer. So I just wanted to let him know, hey, nice to see you, and by the way, let me, for the record, no, I don't do drugs, never have. I jokingly say that bourbon is my drug of choice.
Right.
But even drug dealers, yes, they understand good customer service, and that's why we need a free market, because I want people, as I mentioned in healthcare, I want people to compete for our business, and that includes drugs such as alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. And if we could sell those legally instead of through the channels we have now, then a lot of our problems would go away, because many of our problems are not from the drugs themselves, but rather the prohibition of drugs, just like we had so many problems with alcohol prohibition, funding organized crime.
Right. Well, yeah, I was going to say that prohibition basically gave rise to the mafia in the United States.
Exactly.
So again, government gets involved, it usually turns out bad. There's no other way to say it. They really, the way our government is right now, they usually, if they get their fingers on it, they screw it up every single time.
Exactly. And what we have now, again, the problems are even bigger. And one thing I like to ask people is, when's the last time you heard of a liquor store owner out on the school playground or in the halls of a high school trying to sell gin? Or when's the last time you heard of somebody trying to break into a house because they've got a vodka habit? When you've got legal drugs, you've got legal drug prices, and then people don't have to resort to crime. And if it doesn't bother you that somebody's at home drinking wine, then why should it bother you that they're at home smoking a joint? And I would like to distinguish, some people say, well, what about driving? Well, absolutely. Anybody caught driving under the influence of drugs, they need to be dealt with harshly, just like people who are under the influence of alcohol should be dealt with harshly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what a lot of people don't get is right now the biggest drug pusher in the country is the federal government.
Oh,
I
don't disagree. I would like to hear your position on that.
Well, here's the thing. This is personal experience and people that I know. When I go to the Veterans Administrations, I've talked about this on this show multiple times. When I go to the VA because of back issues, and I tell them straight up, do not give me any narcotics because I will not take them. The first thing they do is they give me narcotics.
Yep.
And I know people who have gone to the Veterans Administration for various reasons, and the VA gives them so much drugs that they actually become hardcore addicted. Then the VA cuts them off. Says, no, you're cut off. You're too much. You might become an addict. Well, they already are. These people are so strung out, and they start getting all kinds of drug sick that they go out and they do commit the crimes in order to get money for dope, and they have to get the dope elsewhere.
Exactly. And could I point out a few other things regarding that?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I don't even think we would have had an opioid crisis if marijuana were legal and doctors could prescribe that, because that is not nearly as addictive. And I really don't even think there's any physiological addiction anyway. I know there's a little bit of debate over that, but we all know it's not nearly as addictive as opioids. And also, once the government gets involved, again, things get out of hand.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
yes.
and let me mention another example. I'm sure if you're a fan of Ron Paul, you're probably a fan of Milton Friedman, right?
Yes, I am.
I love Milton Friedman. I got to meet him in person. I got to ride in a private plane from California to Texas. It was like one of the dreams of my life here. So he pointed out that had cocaine never been illegal, we would have never had, I may have too many negatives there. Let me rephrase it to make it easier to follow. Because cocaine was illegal, we ended up with crack cocaine. Because economically, cocaine would have been cheap enough that it would have made absolutely no sense to make crack cocaine. But because cocaine was illegal, it made economic sense to invent crack cocaine. And we all know that crack cocaine is so much more addictive than cocaine. In fact, when I was in high school, we had to take a drug class to, learn about drugs and, kind of the whole just say no, although this was before just say no. And I was actually taught that cocaine was not addictive. The correct answer on that test is nope, there's no physiological addiction to cocaine. And now we know that, yes, it is physiologically addictive. It's just addictive in a different manner. It takes a longer time and it's a different kind of addiction. So once again, we end up with crack cocaine because the government tries to solve one problem, but creates another.
Well, if you're familiar with Gary Webb and his stories that he published in the San Jose Mercury, the government was actually bringing the coke into the country for the crack, to be processed into crack. And it devastated the inner cities. And they were using the money to fund Iran-Contra. There was government levels on all kinds of it. Barry Seals was bringing it in, and he was running with the DEA and the CIA to do Iran-Contra. So, it was our government was using drugs to fund their little covert wars.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Gary Webb, but that sounds interesting.
Yeah, he was a pretty good writer. He's the one who actually exploded the story about the government involvement in the cocaine trade and everything. And well, of course, government does what they usually do. They completely discredited the guy, and later on, he committed suicide by 2 gunshots to the back of the head.
Of course,
Yes.
of course.
So, but
Yeah.
no, he wrote some really interesting stories. I do remember when that whole situation blew up. People were really mad because they watched their neighborhoods just turn into like these just jungles where
Well,
you're lucky
yeah,
if you could get
and
through them.
and the example I gave was selling liquor in the school.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see two liquor store owners having it out with machine guns because one of them invaded the other corner.
Yep.
You've got liquor stores peacefully selling liquor in their own stores. There's no gunfire that I've ever seen among liquor store owners.
Well, and the other aspect of that too, on the legalization of it, is we wouldn't be overcrowding these prisons for crimes where nobody else there's no other injured party.
Yep, exactly.
So
And what my campaign promise includes, and I can only do this at the federal level, of course, but I hope the states would follow suit, is on my first day in office to pardon all nonviolent crimes, such as simple drug use. And of course, I'm not talking about the people with the machine guns who created problems, who created violence with drugs. I'm talking about just innocent people at home who wanted to use drugs just like I use bourbon. So I would pardon all nonviolent drug users, sex workers, gambling, anything having to do with simple gun ownership, anything like that. And of course, many of the people who are incarcerated who shouldn't be, such as Julian Assange and Albrecht.
And Ed Snowden.
Yep, Edward Snowden, exactly.
Because you mentioned gun ownership, I always have to ask this because I'm a huge Second Amendment supporter. What would your position be as far as the Second Amendment goes and all these laws that have been cropping up for 100 years that pretty much fly in the face of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights?
Yes, that we do have a Second Amendment, and we need to get rid of every single gun law that's been enacted in the past 100 years. And I am a gun owner, and there's no reason to have all of these laws which don't do anything anyway, because since when do criminals say, oh, well, guns are outlawed, so I guess I can't buy a gun? No, they go under underneath to get theirs. So in fact, if you think about it, you can say, and I'm looking at states, for instance. There are many states who are saying, well, maybe we should crack down on guns. Maybe we should outlaw guns. And my response is, yeah, because it works so well with drugs. We outlawed drugs and nobody uses heroin, do they? No. So that's not going to work. And these red flag laws are really scary because basically you're giving individuals the right to take away the Second Amendment without a fair trial.
Without any due process at all.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and I've mentioned this all the time. If people really want to see what the end game of that is, look at this documentary called Innocence Betrayed. And it gives you a history of the genocides that took place during the 20th century. And what was the precursor to every single one of them was disarming the citizenry.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So,
and also the idea that, well, you don't need a gun because the police can be there. The police can't be everywhere. And I am a woman, and I have been a single woman, and I can tell you that a gun is a great equalizer. I could probably be overpowered by almost any 200-pound man who broke into my house. And just look at some of the riots we've had. We're having looting now, but if you look back at Rodney King, there were store owners with assault rifles sitting in their stores who the police absolutely could not get to. And there are so many, you hear of so many stories in which somebody was hiding, they called 911, and the police just got there too late.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, during the Rodney King riots, I was one of the people sitting on top of a rooftop with a shotgun.
Oh, really?
Yes. Not downtown LA. It was in the San Fernando Valley, but we knew the store owner, and he wasn't armed, so me and another guy, we sat up on the roof, and nobody came by the stores. We were pretty thankful about that. But yeah, we were sitting up there waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, an ounce of prevention, right.
Right. And just to switch tracks here real quick, because this one is always a real big one with me, because I don't know what goes through the heads of people in Congress. I can't get a straight answer out of my congressman or my senator. What is going on with the economy in the United States that the government cannot stop spending money?
Yeah, and I like to point out, the reason that Trump lost in the polls, the reason all of the polls were so inaccurate and didn't predict that he would win, is because he attracted people who either had never voted or hadn't voted in 20 years. And there were people who said, we are sick and tired of the same old, we want something different. And they thought they were electing somebody different with Trump. And he turns out to be just as big of a spender as everybody else. So I'd like to point out that if Trump can't make government smaller, because, look, he doesn't have 40 years of political favors to pay back. If Trump can't get government smaller, then I don't have hope that any Republican or Democrat could get government smaller. And my hope is that a lot of those people who are looking for something different will look towards my campaign.
I don't think they want to make government smaller.
Well, I don't think the politicians do, but I do believe that there are citizens who do, both Democrats and Republicans, who think that government is too big. So I think Americans want smaller government. In fact, I've even asked people, is government too big or is government too small? And when they're asked the question, is government too small, they usually laugh. Of course it's not too small. So it's basically the American voters being lied to by the politicians, or being promised one thing and then having their promise broken and they get something else.
Yeah, and watching Donald Trump sign these economic bills, the stimulus package, whatever that was, at $1.3 trillion to keep government, make sure that government stays open, which if you really watch them do a government shutdown, 85% of the government is still open. And they're getting rid of non-essential workers during the shutdown. It's like, well, if they're non-essential, why are they there?
Yeah, well, and I'd like to point out that all of these people who are shutting down the rest of the country, they still get to work. If you're mayor of New York City, if you're the governor of a state, if you're president, you still get your paycheck. You don't have to go wait tables. You don't have to stand behind a register in a store. You get to do your business remotely. In fact, in my own town, I don't know if this person was local. She might have been national, but I saw a local news report on an epidemiologist who was PhD, working from her computer at home, saying we all need to stay home for another 2 months. And I thought, well, easy for you to say. You're a PhD, you can work from home, and I'm sure you're still getting a very nice salary. What about the other people who can't afford it? And now we've got tens of millions of people out of work, and some of those jobs will never come back.
Yeah, and it's kind of laughable, but not in a funny way, when you look at what they deemed essential and non-essential. You notice that the government and the bureaucracies were all deemed essential.
Oh, of course, we can't live without them, can we? And what I found most humorous was that there were reports that there were lobbyists. Now, these are not government employees, okay? These are the special interests. And these lobbyists were saying that they were essential because they were the ones that helped write the laws. and the Congress people could not write the laws without them. How blatant is that?
That's borderline criminal, if you ask me. That
Yeah, that just brings it to light.
that our people in our Congress are not able to write the laws because without the lobbyists.
Yes.
How much money were they floating around in in bribes and all of that? That was one of the great things I liked about Ron Paul. Also, is when lobbyists would come knocking on his door in D.C., he would chase them off.
Yeah,
Tell them to go away.
And also the fact that lobbyists are doing the actual writing tells you that those laws that are being written are going to be awfully favorable to them. It's one thing, it's bad enough to have a lobbyist go to a congressperson and say, hey, I'd like you to support this. But for the lobbyist to actually write the law, it's going to be a lot worse than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, and Mussolini had a very great terminology for that. And he said, and it was fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And he said fascism more outrightly be called corporatism because that's exactly what it is, the merging of corporation and government.
Exactly. And I meet so many people on the left who are against big greedy corporations. And I try to explain how so many of these corporations get their power from the government. Mm-hmm. It's big government giving power to the big corporations to help write the laws, to help keep the markets unfair, and to help keep competition out.
Exactly. So here's my question for you then. What would you do to try to rein the economy in and cut spending? And the biggest one of all, what would you do with the Federal Reserve Bank?
Well, Federal Reserve Bank, I would first audit it and then abolish it. I'm with Ron Paul on that. For the economy, where I would cut spending, that was your general question, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we already talked about the military. If we cut the military by 2/3, we're still tied for the largest military, and we're cutting out a lot of money. I would also go to Social Security. First of all, have an immediate opt-out for younger people because they know the system's broken. They know it's just a Ponzi scheme. And just tell them, okay, you get to take your retirement dollars and put them anywhere you like. Now, for the older people, for the retirees who paid in for 50 or 60 years, I would tell them, look, your money did not go into a lockbox. Instead, it was used to pay for government buildings and just other various government things. So what we're going to do is we're going to sell a lot of those government assets, and we're going to give you your money back so that you can have a safe, secure retirement, not under the whims of Congress. And that would save us a huge chunk as well. And we can cut the government over in half just by those two things alone.
And I would just make the suggestion that maybe we should cut some of these alphabet agencies out as well. Like in particular the ATF.
Oh, of course.
Which is a completely corrupt organization. I mean, they're so corrupt that back in the 90s, when there was actual serious talk going through the halls of D.C. about getting rid of them, they asked the question, well, what do we do with these agents? They're federally sworn agents. Well, we'll send them off to the FBI and all these other bureaus. And all the other bureaus said, no, we don't want them. Absolutely not. You are not letting those people into my agencies because they were so corrupt.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but absolutely we need to get rid of these agencies. First on my list would be the Department of Education, because education is a local issue. Parents, teachers, and students should be able to choose their own education. There's absolutely no reason to get the federal government involved. So right now we've got kind of a one-size-fits-all where people in Appalachia are being told to have the same kind of government or the same kind of education as people in downtown New York. Well, maybe they have different needs. Maybe they have different ways of doing things. So the Department of Education has not helped at all. educational quality hasn't gone up. In fact, if anything, it's gone down. So why do we need them? Let's get rid of them.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they pretty much destroyed education with that Common Core system that they put in place.
Yep.
Dr. Duke Pesta, who I've met here in Wisconsin, had a brilliant lecture and a brilliant presentation about how bad Common Core is and where it came from and who's making all the money off of it. So that's I think is gonna be a tough one though, because even Ronald Reagan couldn't get rid of it.
Well, but keep in mind, first of all, a lot of people have the misconception that Ronald Reagan gave us smaller government.
No, he didn't.
Because, yes, he did cut taxes. Here's the problem, though. He didn't cut spending. Government got bigger every year of the 8 years that he was in office. And every time the Congress gave him a budget that wasn't balanced, he signed it. And if I were president, and I were given a budget that wasn't smaller, that wasn't balanced, I would tell them I refuse to sign it. Go back and work on it some more. So, because here's the thing, Art Laffer and Ronald Reagan were correct. If you decrease taxes, that gives people greater motivation to work. And so you get more money in overall. But instead of just cutting the taxes even further or giving people their money back, they were flush with all this money. And once again, you give politicians money and it's, oh, what can we spend it on this week?
Yeah, and that was supposed to be one of Donald Trump's other big things. I mean, this guy, he's supposed to be a brilliant businessman. This is one of the reasons people voted for him. He's a businessman. He's not a politician. He understands how to work within a budget. And he signed every single bloated budget that crossed his desk so far.
Yeah, apparently he doesn't know how to. Well, to put it in more of a truthful aspect, you never spend other people's money as carefully as you spend your own. And I don't think he would continue to be as successful as he is in business if he didn't look after his own spending. But when it comes to the government, he's not spending his money, he's spending our money, and it's criminal.
Yeah, and the budget and the government is constantly on the upswing. We're borrowing more money, throwing us deeper into debt that we're, at this point, I don't think we're ever going to crawl out of it, because even if you look at the national debt clock, it says we're 24 trillion in the hole now, approximately. But if you look at all the unfunded mandates, we're closer to somewhere in the neighborhood, somewhere between 50 and 100 trillion in the hole. So I'm trying. This is the question that I got to have for everybody who wants to sit in the Oval Office. How are we going to get ourselves out of this debt?
The only way to do, if you're digging a hole, the first thing you need to do is stop digging. Mm-hmm. So, and it looks like the Libertarian Party, the Libertarian members are going to be the only people who are going to get into office and stop digging the holes. And that's what I would do, is first stop digging, stop spending money. We need to slash the budget. And people are afraid to cut the military, even though, as we talked about, we're doing so many things that we shouldn't be doing. And we need to realize that Social Security is just a broken system, and we just got to take people's retirements out of the hands of Congress people. And these Congress people, of course, they have their own good government pensions, and what about the rest of us?
Yeah, I remember when Ron Paul was bringing all this up, everybody started attacking him and calling him crazy, at least from the other two parties. And I got to always tell them, it's like, look, I have been involved in the political system. I was a Republican on the Central Committee in Los Angeles County. Okay, I saw what was going on with these people. So you can't convince me that the Republicans are any better than the Democrats.
No, and like I said, if Trump, an outsider, can't do it, who can?
Yeah.
So, Well, I hate to cut this. I've really enjoyed talking with you, but I do have another interview coming
Yeah.
up here.
Well, you gave me actually a lot more time than I was expecting, so I
I
appreciate
did.
it.
I did, and I still hated to end now, but I could. I am a libertarian. I could talk for hours.
Okay.
but,
Well,
but I have
give
to keep it.
everybody out your website and how they can get a hold of you if they want to join the campaign or donate some money.
I appreciate that. It's joj2020.com. Again, joj2020.com. And we need donations so that we can send the message, send the message that they're not doing a good job. We need somebody new. And we would also love to get help volunteering. And what we've been really surprised about and just overly ecstatic from is that we are getting so many non-libertarian volunteers. So this has just been a great movement.
Okay, great. And once again, congratulations on your nomination. I hope it comes to fruition. I really do, because we definitely need something else in DC.
Well, yes, we do. So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So have a great day.
All right, you have a good one. Nice talking to you.
You too.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.